Good evening. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Living Waters, Falling Deeper in Love with God's Word. I am one of your hosts, Lauren Cruz.
Shabbat Shalom. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I guess we should kind of make a little bit of announcement with some changes on Facebook.
Yes.
We're going to try to accommodate and redirect as best we can, but from what we understand, Facebook will no longer play a live feed from a third party or a second source.
Yeah. So it says it's live there because I had to do some new keys and new all sorts of things. So I'm going to check it on my phone to see if it's playing.
So what I think we're going to do, if this works, then we'll probably go ahead and schedule a live, and which is exactly what Stephanie did on her website or her Facebook page.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work, and we'll probably post this a few times during the week too, is we'll put the direct link to Lamb Network and just follow the link, and the live shows play. You can also see the menu of other shows that are coming up. So if you're not able to join us live, you can watch it as a replay off of Lamb Network, or you could just join us on Lamb Network live. We're still staying at 5 p.m. on Friday evening from 5 to 6, and it's fine. We'll just make it work. And I see that we have a couple of viewers, Stephanie. So it looks like we do.
Tell us where you're watching it if you don't mind, so I can figure it out, because I can't see that it's on my phone. I can't see that it's there. So
right. And I know mine is not playing at all. I don't have any links to mine. So everything tonight is coming off of Stephanie's links. So
if it's working.
Yeah. So if you're watching live tonight on Friday evening, if you guys would just put in the comments, where are you watching?
I'm trying to see if it's there, but I can't. It's not showing that it is, but it seems like I got a reminder, be ready to start live video at 5 p.m. So, you can also go to the Messianic Lamb Radio Facebook page right now.
Yeah.
And it will, it should, maybe it'll be on there live.
I'm not sure.
But we're
all on our phones. Bear with us. We appreciate you. We're just trying to find out, how this is working. And
I'm not sure of anything right now.
Yeah, because it's all new. This is all things that just recently changed. We get no notification on this, and
it doesn't look like it's showing. It doesn't look like it's playing on my but it will if you go to my face. I know that I did get a notification that it's on YouTube, my YouTube channel.
Good.
So if you look up my YouTube channel, just Stephanie Pavlantos right there, you can just find it there, but it's not showing, which I don't understand, because it says live video is starting.
Yeah, I'm not getting the notifications on my phone, and I actually went to the Lamb Network page right now, and we're not being shown live off their off the Facebook page.
So, but we are live on the Messianic Lamb Radio.com. So we are live right there. I can see us.
Right. So, all right. I think we're going to see. We'll see. We'll go back and watch and see what kind of replays we have. And so I think if anything, then we'll just post the Messianic Lamb TV.com address, that get the direct link, and we'll just push you right over, which actually for me, because I have a majority of my followers are on my personal Facebook page, not my author Facebook page. And I wasn't able to link my personal Facebook page to play live. So this could actually be a good thing. We might be able to reach a few more followers off of both pages by just posting the link. So I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. I can't quite figure out why it says that live video is starting, but it's not showing. So I don't know why.
All right.
So
we'll figure it out.
Don't do anything about it now.
So another new thing this evening is new book tonight. It is Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes, and it says removing cultural blinders to better understanding the Bible. And honestly, we are just going to do the introduction chapter tonight. I'll say introduction chapter because it's long. It's a long enough to be
like 20 pages, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of information just in the introduction,
Yeah.
and I thought it was worth just standing on its own. So
Yeah, I guess it's more like 13, but it was still more than just a few pages for an intro.
right.
And then stick around at the end because we have a new outro.
That's right.
So, yeah. So that was kind of fun. We had a
We've
hand
got all
in
kinds of
making
changes.
that.
That's right. Yeah, Mark with Lamb Network has been wonderful about recording new, where we play the disclaimer. That's now going to be, I believe, Stephanie's voice. And I recorded a little, be sure to join us on Lamb Network TV.com where we can see everything that they play. So
yeah,
lots
and then
of changes.
the replay, the reruns. So
right, yeah, and a new little intro and outro video. So it's nice. It's nice to be able to have all that stuff updated. So
yeah.
All right. So we did talk a little bit about the book before we jumped on, because this is a first read for both Stephanie and I. Neither one of us have read this book before. And, we read it each week, just like you guys do. Honestly, I'm in the middle of chapter 2 right now, so I'm not that far ahead. I don't know how far you've gotten into it, Stephanie.
I'm in chapter 1, but not that much. But normally when we do these, one or the other of us have already read the book. So this was like a brand new
cold read.
Neither one of us had read. So
right.
We put it on Facebook. We both put it on Facebook and asked, and lots of people had good things to say about it.
Good and bad. Yeah. I will say. And as we've gotten into it, and I think the one comment that I said to Stephanie is it wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. I am like the nerd and the teacher and the wordsmith, and she and I both share that. And so we want proper interpretation. We want to be taught what words mean and what the culture means, and that's the kind of stuff we love. And he gives you just a tiny bit, and then he really says, well, we're not going to do that. We want you to go look that up yourself. I'm like, no, I want more.
No. That's not what we signed up for.
No. And he actually, the stuff he gave is pretty good. I'm like, this is what I want. This is more of what I want. But then he says, I'm not going to do that. So that was kind of a bummer. The other thing I have noticed for chapter 1 is it's not so much misinterpreting the Bible. It's not so much teaching us the Bible. It's not a lot of teaching us the words and the culture. There's not a lot of that, but it's more of helping us to understand how our Western biases, and I will call it a bias, affects how we interpret things and how we read. And being our race and our financial background and a male or a woman, or all of those things, how they play into how we read the Bible and how we take things from the Bible and make it ourselves. So yes,
even stuff like if I've heard this over and over, when in Mark, I think 7, it says that Jesus said all food was clean. We take that as, all food
I want. Yeah.
Pizza, pepperoni, shrimp cocktail, they're all clean. And no, that's not what he was saying at all. You have to put it in his perspective of food that his father said was clean is clean. Mm-hmm. And that's the context he was saying it. So there's things like that. We just think, well, he said all food was clean. The only thing Jesus called food was what his father said food was.
Right. He actually, I know we haven't gotten to that but he does address that.
Okay.
Because he does talk about eating pork in here and I think he touched on it a little bit right at the beginning too. But he basically says, we have, I don't know, 3 to 10, 8 to 10 words that we use for pork, pork chops and pork roast and pork, barbecue and all these different things. And whereas the Hebrew reader, there's one word for pork, a pig, right? Because it's not considered even food. That's not on the same wavelength.
Exactly.
He does address that, and he does, there's more of that in there. So I think when we get to that, that'll be a good conversation. But let's just start with the introduction. I did have a lot underlined and highlighted notes. I thought the introduction was really a good book, and a really good section, and I was really, really hoping there'd be more of that. And then it changes a little in chapter 1. So
yeah. So somebody said, Lucille said that she was on the lambnetwork.tv.
Good.
And we are loud and clear there. So
good.
Yeah. So
good.
That's good. She can at least get us there. But I'm sorry it did not show up on my Facebook page.
Yeah,
so.
I guess.
Anyway, it's okay.
Anyway,
we'll just go.
All right. So if you guys have the book, we hope that you would join us. Please put in your questions and comments. I think this is going to be a book that we really would depend on your questions and comments. I mean, Stephanie and I when we do a book study, we just kind of talk about it, and we just kind of share our thoughts and ideas. And we have an hour to fill. So honestly, we need some of your thoughts and ideas. And I will say, when I posted it on Facebook, all the comments, either everybody that had read the book said it was a good one, and others are like, I'm going to go buy it now. So I had some good comments. Stephanie, on the other hand, had a couple that said, no, not a good book. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so people are putting comments on the others. They won't show up here for us, but they are on Lamb Network. So I might run back and forth just to keep up with comments.
Please
so
do.
So you know.
Please do. Yeah, that would be great.
So I had some that thought, there was one woman on my Facebook page who said that she had heard it was very new age. And so, but the majority of people liked it. So I'm interested to see what we like.
So far, it's nothing that would appear to be new age to me.
No.
So yeah. I don't know that.
Tied to something maybe that they were totally unfamiliar with.
Could be.
That looking at it through a Hebrew culture. No. I mean, because I remember telling someone, like, when you go Jeremiah 28, what is it? 11. Let's 29:11. So Jeremiah 29:11, the verse that everyone loves to quote about, I have plans of future for you. And I said, to somebody once, I said, well, do you realize that promise was to the Jewish people coming out of Babylon? And he goes, I don't care. It's my promise. I claim it. And I said, well, it helps just to keep it in context of who he was actually talking to. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't relate to us, but you must first keep things in the context that they're in. So I look at them through those eyes.
I agree. All right. Well, if you have a Bible, why don't you take a look at Revelation? Let me see if I can find
3.
Revelation 3, where he's addressing 15 and 16. Yeah. And this is where, he starts off strong, and I was like, yes, I want more stuff like this. Yeah. He made the comment of how if you read Revelation 3, 15, 16, I don't mind reading it if you want me to, but it's to the letter of the churches, and it's to the letter of the church of Laodicea. And he says, I would rather you be hot or cold. It's the one we all know about, where I'd rather spit you out. Here we go.
Because you are lukewarm.
Lukewarm, right. It says, 15, 16. I know your deeds, that you're neither cold nor hot. I would that you were cold or hot. So because you're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of your mouth, out of my mouth. And I actually asked my husband, because we've heard that, we've heard that 100 times. Yeah. What do you think that means? And he 100% stated exactly the way that the author did in the book. That is often used to say that we need to be on fire for Christ, because we're either hot for Christ or we're just cold.
Yeah, which is not true.
Right. And we missed the part where I want you to be hot or I want you to be cold.
Because if you're hot, if you've been working outside and you get a cold glass of water, it's refreshing. It's a good thing.
Right. And that's the point he makes. Yeah. He goes, He goes farther to say Laodicea to the north is hot springs, a city with hot springs. So they pipe down this warm, wonderful, welcoming. We all love a hot spring water.
Yeah.
Or to the south is Colossae, and Colossae had all the cold springs, and exactly what she was saying, cold, refreshing, invigorating. So in Revelation, Jesus isn't saying, I want you to be hot, on fire for me, or not on fire for me. Like, why would Jesus ever say, I don't want you to be on fire for me, right?
Yeah.
But he's saying, I want you to be warm and welcoming, or I want you to be cool and refreshing, and invigorating. But because you're not, because you're just lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out. And so that a wonderful example of context is wonderful. I mean, so necessary, because I've never been to Laodicea. I didn't know springs are above and below, and I've always been taught from the pulpit, this is a message about being on fire for God, and don't be a lukewarm Christian. And, and
it doesn't want us to be lukewarm, but lukewarm is no good. I mean, by the time they got the cold water from the south, it was lukewarm. It was no longer cold. By the time they got the hot spring water from the north, it was lukewarm. So think about, you're anxious to get in this nice hot tub, and it's just barely warm, and so that's no fun. That's like, I don't want to be in this or whatever. So yeah, that was a big problem there. And we often don't understand the cultural reason why the water was lukewarm.
Right.
And then, so let me just add a little thing here.
Yeah.
Because also in that church, he accused them of being naked, blind, naked, and something else. And I thought it was interesting because I heard someone today talking about being clothed in righteousness. So we were to be clothed in righteousness, and that's part of our clothing. And like he even uses, Jesus used a parable about someone coming to a wedding that was not in their wedding garment, and being naked is kind of associating it with sin. Being naked is associated with sin, and being clothed is being clothed in righteousness or the Lord's garment. So it's very interesting, because even that point, if we don't understand that, what the difference is between being naked and being clothed, and how it relates to us spiritually.
Well, it's a pretty strong list. It says, I know, and you do not know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. So it's a pretty big list for them. And by the way, Laodicea means justice for the people. And so when you take in the meaning of that church and how they are treating each other and being lukewarm and rich, I'm rich and I'm wealthy, and it's not they're not treating each other just, they're treating each other poor and wretched and, blind and naked. So
right.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot to that as well, that we don't understand when we read it. It's like a double dig. Even the names of the churches have a little bit of a lesson in what adds to the lesson of what he's saying in Revelation.
Yeah. When I taught on this, it was interesting because Jesus described himself in each of those churches. Like I am, like he would do a sentence of his own description, and then he would tell them what they were. So it was interesting because each time the description that he gave them of himself, they understood. They totally got, because it was a play on words with what their word, where they were, or what their church name meant.
What he was addressing.
Yeah.
So that's a great example of a challenge that we as Westerners have, that we read it quickly. We take for granted, we just accept what other people tell us about what the Bible is supposed to mean. And a lot of times we don't go and dig it out ourselves. Many people, I would just, how many people leave a church service and say, I'm going to go home and look up that passage and dig into it and do research, or look up words that he talked about. It's not a normal thing. I know, I'm totally going off track with this, but I'm doing a study on the book of Ruth. And as I read the book of Ruth, I'm circling words that and a question mark I need to go look up, because there's such a point being made, but I'm like, I know that word's got something else to go. There's something else going on with that word.
Absolutely.
And when you look it up in the original Hebrew, you're like, oh, now I understand that aspect of Ruth. There's, and nobody ever talks about that part. So
no. And even like, we don't even think about who Boaz's mother was.
Yeah, Rahab.
Yeah, which was not a Jewish woman.
Right.
So yeah, and then he marries Moabite. So yeah, all
those don't even know, and most don't know the history of the Moabites and where they came from. So
yeah, so it's very interesting. But the last comment he makes on page 10 is, he said Jesus wished his people were hot, like those waters in the north, or Hermopolis, and then, or cold, like the refreshing waters of Colossae. Instead, their discipleship was unremarkable. That's rough. I mean, your discipleship is unremarkable. Like, you're just average. You're not even cold for me. You're not even hot for me. You're neither. You're not refreshing, and you're not warm. Like you said that already, but it's like, that would be a real hard thing to swallow. Like, there's nothing remarkable about your walk with me.
Right.
You don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear that.
Yeah. That's a tough one. All right. Well, then he moved into the foreign land of Scripture. I really like this part. I have
a lot underlined here.
My husband, I'm like, we went camping this weekend, and so I had my husband a lot of downtime. Like, I have got to tell you. Let me read this to you, and he hates it. He hates it when I do that. He hates it when I do that. So it says we tend to read Scripture in our own when and where today. Like, we're reading something and we're like, how does that apply to us today? And application is great. I get that. But we're putting in understanding and phrases and, how we handle situations, our problems, in today's when and where. And we can't do that. We have to remove that from it. And in a way, we read it in a way that it makes sense to us on our terms.
Right.
Everybody does that. Everybody does that. But the whole premise of this book is be aware that you do that and don't do that.
And just think, if no one had ever told you what any of this meant,
right?
What would you be doing differently if you just read the words and took them at face value?
Just read the word. And he says it's a better method to seek what the passage meant to the original hearers and then ask, how does it apply to us? So, and there's no way around the fact that our cultural and historical contexts supply us with habits of mind that lead us to read the Bible entirely different than Christians and other cultures of the world would. And I thought, and this was a good kicking off for me. We read things, even within our own country, we read things and we understand and interpret things, and we think that's how everybody in the whole world believes. So even in our own country, among denominations, some denominations will read a passage and completely have a different take on a certain passage of Scripture than another denomination would, or somebody in the north versus the south, or east versus the west, or whatever. But we read it and we think that's the only way it can be interpreted, and that's not the case.
And and I remember a time, it's like, how do I put this? There would sometimes be friction between myself and like the pastor of the church that I would go to, because I never read the Bible through the lenses of a denomination. I don't know what it was about that the Lord just put that in me, like, not to pay attention to just because my pastor said it. Maybe it's just a little rebellion in me, but I always read it and tried to read it, and was very insistent on reading it by the context. Who is he talking to? Why is he talking about this? What does it mean in his culture? And I think that for me, at least, that to do that was it just made me realize, like, if I just listened to whatever everybody else said about what scripture meant,
Mm-hmm.
I would not have the same walk. And I don't know if that would be good. And I think that when we put our pastors on pedestals, which pastors are good people, but when we put them on a pedestal and we think, okay, I just do what he tells me to do because he's the pastor and he knows what this book says better than me, so I'm just going to do it. No, that's never what God intended. He
Right.
gave us the Holy Spirit to teach us ourselves, and he's a better teacher. And if we rely on him, but we have to study, we have to look, we have to read.
Right.
And he does make good points here. Because he's, where were you reading? Were you reading?
I was reading from 11 and 12.
Okay.
But I want to skip. I think I want to skip ahead and talk about the prodigal son as the example.
Well, I have a lot here.
And then we can come back to the Adam.
Okay.
The Adam issue.
Because I've got a lot on those 2 pages highlighted too. So.
Okay.
But yeah. So.
Well, the example he gives is he being an American professor, he asked 100
that was good. I remember
of his students to read and repeat the story of the prodigal son. And so he did. And of 100, only 6 students mentioned a famine, mentioned that there was a famine in the land.
Famine in the land. Yeah.
And then he went to Russia and he had an opportunity to teach this in a Russian university and asked 50 students, can you read and repeat the story of the prodigal son? 46 of those students commented about the famine. And culturally, here in America, we've never really dealt with a famine, unless we lived through the Great Depression, which those are our grandparents or older. We really haven't dealt with famine and food shortages in America, whereas in other parts of the world, that is something that people have dealt with. And think of the biblical times, famine. It would have definitely been something that they were well versed in. And so he went on to talk about how in America, we look at the prodigal son and, we skip over the famine aspect. And our thrust of interpretation is, look how belligerent that son was and how willful and sinful and a spendthrift. And he should, and what a wonderful father to take him back, and how he should have, what a great thing, and how forgiving the father is for his terrible, terrible sin. And people in other countries read this passage. And this was part of the study. I mean, he definitely did a lot of really good discernment in here, but he said the application of the story has less to do with willful rebellion, more to do with God's faithfulness to deliver his people from hopeless sin.
Right.
So, and that, what a different teaching. And I thought, that makes sense if rather than focusing on how the father responded, we could focus on how the brother responded, because the brother he's angry, he's jealous, he wants nothing to do with caring for his brother. What a contrast to the nature of God.
Right. And the very last line, the boy's problem is not that he was wasteful, but that he is lost.
He was lost. Right.
And we forget that he's lost. He's like any other prodigal, who would do the same thing. It's like, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to find out where I can go. I mean, and even on my podcast, I mean, I have interviewed different people whose lives look so different now than they did when they were 18 or 19 or 25, because of the twists and turns of their life. And then having even been able, whether to grow from it, to the Lord intervene and intercept that and put them on a new path. I mean, it's been so interesting. And this boy is no different. He is that boy that is just gotten off track. And the Lord used a famine to bring him home.
Right. Well, my whole book, Proverbs 31, the Proverbs 31 woman, I have stories of so many women. I always say, if you had met them in the midst of their life, you would have never thought they were Proverbs 31 women, according to the standard that we put on them. But it's by the grace of God that their stories have been redeemed. And I thought too, as I was reading that, my notes were, boy, that really makes you rethink all the stories now that mention famine. Like, the book of Ruth, they went away from Bethlehem because there's a famine. And then there's a line that says, Naomi heard that God has provided relief. And so that's God's provision in the whole story. Joseph in famine, and just
Jacob and all the brothers.
Yeah. So I thought, boy, that really
never experienced it. So when we read it, we don't really think about famine and what it can do to your family.
Right. And how desperate you are, I mean, groceries have gone up, and we're not desperate yet, but I'm telling you, we have made adjustments of what we buy and how we eat, and we're eating cheap now. Beans and beans and rice are becoming a staple a couple nights a week because we can afford that. But I mean, it's
I mean, my mom grew up on beans and cornbread.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they ate when times were tough back in the 30s and early 40s. And, so, So, but we did have a question here.
Good.
Lucille said, how do you define hearers? So I think that was when we were talking about the hearers of the word. Do we have people today who can actually hear? So I don't know if she's thinking hearing from God. Or if she's thinking of hearers, but the way I understand it, when we think about it, we're like, if Jesus was talking in the Gospels, who were his listeners? So we might even put it listeners, but the people hearing his sermons, his teachings, how would they understand some of those things?
Right.
And I think that we have to try hard to be good listeners nowadays. I think I have to try hard. I mean, there are people who naturally are good hearers, and I'm not talking about they have better hearing than me, but they probably do, but they're better listeners. And that's a big difference. And even in prayer, I mean, how much time do we take to listen for the voice of God answering, or, even just making a comment, a point, pointing out something or answering a question we have. I mean, how often do we take the time to listen? So
that's right. Yep. I agree. It sounded like her question was more, do you hear from God kind of question.
Yeah. And how many people actually hear from God? And I've actually been told quite a bit from people like, Stephanie, God's never spoken to me. And I said, but I think in those cases, we have to really think about why really, and ask that question in all seriousness, and think about it and let the Lord, the Holy Spirit, tell us why. Because are you even caring what he's going to say? I mean, when you pray, do you tell the Lord what you're going to do, or are you asking him if I can do this? Can I buy this car? I need a car. Is this the best car for me? Or Lord, I'm going to buy X car here, and it's a $45,000 car, so you'll have to provide the money. That kind of thing. So I think there's a difference in whether we're asking for permission or whether we're telling. So
that's a good point. All right, I'll let you go back a couple of pages. Let's bring up some of the things that you had wanted to talk about.
So I think that one near the top of 12 is basically he said here, we believe truth is truth, but there's no way around the fact that our cultural and historical context supply us with the habits of mind that lead us to read the Bible differently than Christians in other cultural and historical contexts.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have Middle Easterner people reading the Bible, they're going to understand the culture better than we are. And even though, we can say, well, there's a bigger truth here, then that doesn't matter. But we may be missing out on something that we need to understand, that because we don't pay attention to the culture and language and history that we don't get.
Right. And he actually says way down at the bottom, we instinctively fill in the gap with a piece from our own culture. And we do it so quickly and so easily. We're not even aware that we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole thing here. The majority of our worldview, like the majority of an iceberg, is below the waterline. The part we notice, what we hear, eat, say, and consciously believe is really only the visible tip.
Right.
The majority of these powerful shaping influence lurks below the surface, out of plain sight. More significantly, the massive underwater section is the part that sinks ships. And I think what he's saying there is like all those things that you don't see and that you don't want to consider and you don't want to think about, that is what's going to shake your faith if you don't get them.
Yeah, I agree. All right, page 13. He begins to talk a little bit about how we have interpreted, I want to say, 1 Timothy 2, 12 and 13. If you've got your Bible, you're welcome to turn there. But it was the verse basically says, Adam was formed first, then Eve. And then we have an argument or something that's been presented within the church that, and I have heard this teaching, because Adam was first, then he has the authority. He is first is better, right? We've read it that being in the first place would be a better place, and that because he is first, he has, the authority that's given. But in Paul's day, however, this is on page 13, right near the bottom, something quite different went without being said. And he says that a lot in the book. Like there's things that we read in the Bible that go without being said. And because the early culture would have completely understood what they were talking, what's being inferred, and we're missing that piece. But quite different than what's being said. The law of, and I'm going to say this wrong, primogeniture started with the firstborn child received a larger inheritance, and with it a greater responsibility than all other children. Not because he or she was more preferred, deserving, or better qualified in any way, but merely because he or she was the firstborn. We've talked about this in a previous book that we looked at. We talked about how in the Middle Eastern culture, there were tribes and clans and the firstborn son was going to take over, where the father was known as the one who was the provider, the protector, did the negotiations, also served in the tent. There was some, we hadn't really talked about this. It talks about how Jacob was a man of the tents, and that was, we read that and we think, oh, well, that's terrible. He wasn't out hunting and he wasn't a manly man like Esau. Well, according to the culture, he should have been a man of the tents because he was home taking care of and being responsible, feeding, tending to his clan, his
and
tribe.
Also studying.
Studying
was probably the wrong word, but listening for the voice of the Lord.
So
the man of the tent was a man who stayed in the presence of the Lord as well. So
So there. He kind of talked a little bit about that, and he did make the comment. First, the Bible indicates clearly that there's other firstborns who were the favored. He talks about Jacob. Jacob was the one deserving brother. Israel loved Joseph. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Jacob was the one chosen because he sold, Esau sold his birthright. He didn't care about his birthright.
Right.
Another one I came
It
up
was a
with.
big deal not to care.
Yeah. I also mentioned, I came up with David. David was chosen as the king, and he was the least, right? He was the youngest son out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering what other examples we could come up with.
Yeah. I mean, this is a little more on the extra biblical side. Mm-hmm. But there's actually some extra biblical writings that aren't necessarily just written off, or just thought less of, but they actually have some merit too, that they could be historical, but that Jesus was the last born because of his father being so much older than his mother, that he may have already had children, and that there is some. So I guess what I'm saying is that, like, just like David being the last, the youngest, Joseph being one of the youngest, you have that pattern that Jesus himself very well could have been the youngest instead of the oldest as we think of him, because he could have had older stepbrothers.
Right. Well, the point they're making too is, just because Adam, like, there's a verse in the Bible that describes Adam being first, and it states Adam was first.
Exactly.
But that's not a verse in the New Testament to establish an entire theology and doctrine on, because there are patterns within the Bible that clearly show the first has additional responsibilities. Firstborn has additional responsibilities as the clan leader. They're going to take it on because they are firstborn, but it does not necessarily mean that they are the best leader. They are the best choice. They are the favorite. They are, the most efficient, anything like that. And so that has turned into an entire teaching of how women cannot lead or teach men, because men are first. So he kind of addresses that.
Yeah.
He didn't go into it
to take things even out of the context, because, like, when we had Julie on, she talked about, women were to be silent. Well, it says the women. There's a definite article there, meaning a certain group.
Right?
Those women need to be silent because there were women causing trouble, and it was how to behave. There was an overarching. We have to look at the whole context to say that there were three groups of people he told to be silent, not just women. And so we kind of overlook those things, and it's important to read the whole passage instead of taking one verse and using it as, well, this is why women cannot speak in the church or cannot answer a question. And she even talked about the fact that the church she went to when she was young, she could not ask a question in a Bible study. She had to tell her husband the question then, or she had to write it down and have her husband give it to a man who was leading it. So those kinds of things are really, keeping, I don't know. I don't think that that's what God had in mind. That's just
Well, he makes another point. He uses another situation with women, another verse about how women should have their heads covered.
Oh, yes.
And the head covering aspect. And, for some, they've taken that as we need to constantly keep our heads covered. And he makes the point that a married woman, when she left the house, she would cover her head.
Yes.
That was culturally acceptable and expected. And the only places that she would not have her head covered would be at home. And she would have the option of not doing it, like if she had a dinner party or guests and it was extending hospitality in her home. But what it signifies is a very casual response, right? She's not, it's just, if you left your home, you were expected to cover your head. Well, women were coming to the church very casually and not covering their head. And it was making the point of, they were acting more like a country club. They were going about showing off and not coming before the church with the standard traditions of married women covering their heads.
Yeah. And I also had read, I mean, because I'm just adding to what he said, I guess, but I had also read that, when he tells them, if you're a married woman, you should be up there. If you're praying, if you're speaking, if you're teaching, you need to have your head covered if you're a married woman, because don't get up there and act like you're a single woman who didn't have to cover her head necessarily, or wore her hair down a different way.
Yeah.
And then you had the whole thing in Corinthians where you had homosexuals. And so you had men wanting to look like women even back then. So that's not even a new concept for us in our 21st century, So it's very interesting because you have to put it all into context again.
Yeah.
So what page are you on?
I'm on like 14, 15, 16.
Okay, I just turned to 16. So that's why.
16, 17. He had the one where he was talking about the person taking these are cultural differences about the person who wouldn't guess on a quiz.
Oh yeah, that was good too. That was really good.
Yeah. On page 20, that goes all the way up to page 20. So I didn't want to get too far ahead if you had some other things that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, he repeats that whole iceberg image again because of what it kind of stands for, and we have to keep thinking or reminding ourselves that there's more under the water. There's more to, like, even one verse that you might read, you cannot take out of context because there's more to it that's lurking below the water, and you need to see it all. And he said, in short, while this is a book about biblical interpretation, our primary goal is to help us learn to read ourselves. And he said, before we can be confident we are reading the Bible accurately, we need to understand what assumptions and values we project into the Bible, those things that go without being said, which you already mentioned, and that make us assume that some interpretations are self-evident and others are impossible. And again, I think we can't just look at the Bible through our denomination, through our gender, through our whether it's even how we got along with our dad, right?
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
He had a quote on page 17 that I think kind of plays into this. It says, the average American church will look very different 20 years in the future than it did 20 years ago. Contrary to popular opinion, the church is not dying in America. He goes on to talk about how a lot of people think the church is going to die off. It says the church is not dying off in America. It is alive and well, but it's alive and well among immigrants and ethnic minority communities and not among the majority of white churches in the United States. And I thought, that's true, because so many people who are coming into America are from countries that cannot freely worship, cannot have, what we have as far as resources. And I know when I went to Israel, when I was in Jerusalem, we went to church on a Sunday morning. We went to a Muslim church in the Muslim quarter. They had church. I'm not kidding. Their church was all day long. Their service was all day long because it was the only time they got to meet. They had to do it quietly, right? And it was under a threat. And they had church all day long. They would have a meal together and they would continue to have church because that was all they had. It was all they had.
Right.
So imagine, like, we're watching the clock after an hour hour. So he's at like 63 minutes. I think it's time to go. So
yeah. And one last thing before we move on to the questions. At the bottom of 17, he said, if our cultural blind spots keep us from reading the Bible correctly, then they can also keep us from applying the Bible correctly. So that was a very good point he made there. And I think we need to understand. So then he goes into the story about when he was in an island north of Australia and south of the Philippines, and he was giving a test. So that was a good story. But he's
Yeah.
giving this test, and it was like, multiple choice. But he'd have some that were just, everyone was leaving blank. And he's like, how come you didn't at least guess? And he said, and the student said, it wouldn't have been right for me to guess. I didn't know the answer.
Yeah. If I had gotten it right, then you would have assumed that I knew it, and that would have been a lie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they wouldn't even guess.
What if I accidentally guessed the correct answer?
Yeah.
I would be implying that I knew the answer when I didn't, and that would be lying. Okay, as a teacher in America, I almost fell out of my chair when I read that statement.
I bet you did.
These kids in America today spend more time and effort cheating than actually learning.
Oh, I know. I know. I was tutoring someone during COVID and helping him online. And he would just get online and look up the answer, like go on Google and search for the answer. And I'm like, that's cheating. He goes, so?
Yeah, I don't care.
So?
And it actually takes less time to actually read an article and answer a question than to go dig out the answer somewhere. I mean, it's ridiculous. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was amazed. And even my son, he goes, Mom, he hated college, and not because of his classes or whatever, but he goes, everyone cheated. And even, I homeschooled him up until 11th grade. So 11th and 12th grade, he was in a program at the school for engineers, kids who wanted to go into engineering. And he was like, they all just cheated. They were doing each other's homework. He goes, and the teacher knew it. It's like they can't do anything about it anymore. They don't even try. So it was just, I was like, I'm sorry.
I have, I know you can't see it, but I have a smiley face.
I see it. I see that.
Oh, I thought that was great.
And he goes, have you never read Paul? And he goes, I thought I had my PhD was in Paul.
I thought that was hilarious. I know. I thought that was great.
So yeah, I have read that. I've read it a lot and I've studied it a lot. But he goes, it reminded me that Paul told believers to obey their parents. And so that was on the eloping. Somebody had eloped and they were like, do we kick them out of the church? And he goes, eloping?
That was hilarious. Yeah.
Goes, eloping? What does that matter? He goes, they disobeyed their parents. They did not get their parents' permission to marry. And that's when he said, don't you study Paul?
Yeah. I have a PhD in Paul. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I wish they had stuck with. They do go into the next chapter very differently. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the questions.
Yeah. Oh, and so our new ending is longer, our new outro.
Yeah. So
we need to basically just make sure that we end by 57:30. So
which is only a couple of seconds. We were usually stopping around 58 anyway because of all the outros.
Yeah, about a minute longer, but we have to end a minute shorter, I guess, is basically. But please stick around and watch our outro.
Watch our new one.
I'm excited. So
he does give you questions at the end of each chapter, and I wrote down, I answered them. Excuse me. We want this book to enrich your reading and not distract from it. We want to give you greater confidence, not less, in the Word of God. Yet the challenge to read the text differently can be unsettling. What risks do you see in opening yourself up to the new readings? And I thought, oh, that's neat. Well, you're gonna lose your family. You're gonna make your friends mad at you. You're gonna get a lot more fights at church.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Definitely.
So, you and I have both faced some of that stuff just because it's like, do you know that that's not what it really means?
Right.
What do you mean?
Right.
I've always heard that.
Yeah.
Well, when we did the whole thing from the Lost in Translation about being a bride, that, being a bride, there were people who were very offended when I talked about that. So.
It says, number 2, sometimes Christians are comfortable with the old misreadings. Since we believe we are responsible to apply and not merely study scripture, a better interpretation may be may challenge you to new applications. How ready are you to remove some cultural blinders and read the text better? I'm totally fine. I'm wide open. Teach me. I have no problem.
So yeah, these are the questions. So if you have, of course, I know. So Lucille just said, think about AI. She said she's getting her doctorate, and she said, my professor warned our class, I can tell if you use AI,
you can
not pass.
Yeah, I teach English, and my kids write essays. Again, they cheat. But there are ways. I'm not going to give up my secrets, but there are ways that I can definitely tell. There are tools out there to signal it that will catch it, but also I know how kids write, and when you pop out an essay, it does not sound like you. But there's a few different ways that teachers can use to catch the kids, which is awesome.
Yeah, I always had my students in biology write reports on different things, and I started just putting the first 3 sentences, copy and paste it, and put it in Google, and it would bring up the whole report.
The whole paper.
The whole paper that belonged to somebody else, and I'd say, you cheated. You just this whole paper.
The kids copy and paste the prompt into the AI builder, and so that'll spit out the essay.
Oh yeah.
So in white font, because we have a white screen, I'll type in, like distractor words like Frankenstein or something. I'll put it just in a weird word. So when AI writes it out, it includes that word. And so then when they cut and paste their essays, the words in their essay, they have no idea what the essay is about because they didn't write it.
Funny.
And so then I'll see the signal word and I'm like, copied. So yeah.
Wow.
There's a few different ways.
That's good. That's good to know.
Yeah. Totally off topic, but yeah.
Oh, we're almost out of time. So
all right.
Third question. You want to?
Perhaps you've already begun to recognize the ways in which your cultural assumptions affect your interpretation of Scripture. Take a moment to think through any biblical passages or issues you hope to understand better in this book. And I think what they showed us is a great example. Yep. So next week, stay tuned for part 2, and I'll go ahead and do.
It will actually be chapter 1.
All right. Thanks, guys. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
If you missed today's show and want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all of the other live Lamb show archives on the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the lamnetwork.tv website. I'm Stephanie Pavlantos, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.